I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
We must avoid at all costs the resumption of hostilities in Gaza that would lead to an immense tragedy.
Will the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas hold? Disputes over reported violence, aid and hostage releases threaten to inflame tensions once again.
AI is not standing still, neither can we.
World leaders and tech giants come together to lay out their visions for the future of artificial intelligence.
United Council is the only council that is effective council. Only if the council is united, then we can have an effect on the ground.
Finding common ground in a time of constant challenges. A conversation with Slovenia's ambassador. Next.
Developments in the Middle East region remain a top priority at the UN. The amount of aid getting into Gaza has increased with the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. But the needs are still great, and the Palestinian enclave faces an uncertain future. There is concern about whether the ceasefire will hold. This week, Hamas accused Israel of violating the deal and said it would delay a hostage release. Israel says if the release does not happen Saturday as planned, it will resume the conflict. The chief of press in Geneva shared a statement from the Secretary General urging both sides to stick to the agreement.
On behalf of the Secretary General on the situation in Gaza, through which he says, quote, we must avoid at all costs the resumption of hostilities in Gaza that would lead to an immense tragedy. I appeal to Hamas to proceed with the planned liberation of hostages next Saturday, and both sides must fully abide by their commitments in the ceasefire agreement and resume.
The international community is closely watching developments in Syria. After a sudden power shift, significant questions remain about the country's future.
Mr. President, let us remember that the challenges Syria faces are myriad and immense, including an ongoing conflict, a fragmented security landscape, a battered economy, and a population emerging from 14 years of war in a situation of great hope, but division too.
That's Special Envoy Geir Pedersen. Syrian officials say they expect a new government to be in place on March 1st. They are pledging an inclusive government and say there is no policy of retribution for supporters of other factions within the country. There is also concern about humanitarian challenges within Syria. More than 7 million people were internally displaced before the change in leadership. Here's China's ambassador Fu Tong.
At this critical juncture, it is important for the international community to provide constructive assistance to Syria. China supports the promotion of a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process.
Changes in Syria and other parts of the Middle East region have raised concern about terrorism and a potential resurgence of militant groups. The Security Council held a briefing on the threat posed by ISIL, also known as Daesh.
According to the UN Secretary General's latest report, ISIL continues to make inroads despite the steady progress by member states in targeting its leadership and financial operations. In addressing the Council on Monday, the United Nations Office for Counter-Terrorism also reported that ISIL and other terrorist groups now pose significant threats to peace and security across the African continent.
The challenges posed by Daesh remain complex, with humanitarian, security and governance concerns persisting across regions affected by its activities. The humanitarian and security crisis in the northeast of the Syrian Arab Republic remains dire, with more than 40,000 individuals confined in camps and detention facilities under conditions marked by overcrowding, inadequate shelter and limited access to clean water and sanitation. Beyond the Middle East, Daesh remains agile, taking advantage of ongoing conflicts, and regions experience growing instability.
China has expressed concern over terrorist organizations exploiting the situation in Syria and has called on Syrian authorities to take active steps to counter this. China also warned that Africa is fast becoming a new frontier for international counterterrorism.
The United Nations and its partners should strengthen their cooperation with the African Union and the other regional organizations and support Africa in strengthening its counterterrorism capacity building and institutional building. China has always been a supporter of and contributor to international counterterrorism cooperation and has long been helping developing countries, especially African countries, strengthen their counterterrorism capacity.
While there might have been some varying opinions during Monday's Security Council session on just how best to deal with global terrorism, Council members did express the need for a collective, comprehensive approach to combat terrorism in all forms that would result in lasting peace and universal security. Jody Jacob, CGTN, New York.
UN officials say diplomacy is the only way to bring an end to the violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Fighting between rival factions has been escalating in the eastern part of the country, creating dire situations for civilians.
Getting aid to Goma is one of our biggest challenge we are facing. The Goma airport, our main humanitarian lifeline, remains closed and non-operational for a number of reasons. And without this airport, we cannot evacuate the seriously injured, transport the necessary medical supply, or bring in humanitarian reinforcement. So all parties must act now to work together to reopen the airport and allow humanitarian flights to resume.
That's Bruno Lee Marquis, Deputy Special Representative for the DRC. The UN says hospitals in Goma are overwhelmed and the risk of epidemics of cholera and mpox are high. The conflict has also forced 500,000 people from their homes since January 1st. Let's take a look at some of the other issues on the UN's agenda.
AI is not standing still, neither can we. Let us move for an AI that is shaped by all of humanity, for all of humanity. In other words, let's make sure we are ready for the future right now.
Secretary General Antonio Guterres joined world leaders and tech industry representatives in Paris for the AI Action Summit. Guterres urged global guardrails for the technology and access for all. Chinese Vice Premier Zhang Guoqing stressed his country's willingness to work with other nations on AI. Humanitarian needs in Sudan are growing. OCHA officials say some 30 million people now require assistance. That's about 5 million more than last year. The conflict-torn country is at the center of the world's largest displacement crisis. A group of female astronauts gathered to mark the 10th International Day of Women and Girls in Science. They stressed the need for gender equality in science and technology fields.
Coming up.
It's 80 years of UN this year. I think we'll need to focus how we strengthen the multilateral system.
UN Insider.
Slovenia joined the UN in 1992. The Central European nation currently holds a non-permanent seat on the Security Council. I sat down with Slovenia's permanent representative to the UN, Samuel Zbogar. Ambassador, Slovenia is entering its second year as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. If you can you walk us through what a challenging 2024 was for you and as you led the presidency in September?
We are on the council every 25 years as a small country. And so when you enter the council, you come all enthusiastic that you're entering the body of peace and security and that you're going to make peace in the world. You are determined, you're committed, but very soon, I think you confront the reality of the Security Council, which is that it reflects the atmosphere in international relations. And at the moment, that atmosphere is not that good. It's increasing polarization among the big powers. And that made Council in 2024 not so effective as we would wish to. So you have these three big conflicts on Ukraine, on Gaza, on Sudan, and on each of them we couldn't really make a breakthrough. Then last year also was the time when we saw the erosion of the respect for the charter. We saw the erosion of respect for international law, for international humanitarian law. That we saw very clearly in Gaza, also in Sudan. We saw attacks on humanitarian workers, and also it seems like erosion of the rules that were governing the world or the UN for the past 80 years. That's why our presidency, September, we decided that we need to talk about it, that we need to talk about the leadership for peace, which we believed was missing. So we had this debate for the leaders, and 90 leaders came during the high-level week, and we did get commitment from everybody to charter and to respect international law. But I think the challenge is still there.
So how are you approaching 2025, and what are your priorities at the Council this year?
So this year, I think we'll be maybe more active on the priorities that we set for ourselves when we entered. Not the regional priorities, but thematic priorities. Like the water in armed conflict, the climate change. But then, of course, we'll have to see what we do about the real issues, which is Gaza. And these will be big topics this year. What will happen with Gaza? What will happen with the Gaza after the conflict? What's the role of the UN there? What will happen to UNRWA? Where we believe we were the face of UNRWA in the council last year, so we want to continue to be this promoter of UNRWA and the role of UNRWA for Palestinian refugees. What will happen with Ukraine? Are we finally going to get the ceasefire and peace in Ukraine, which for us is very important because it's part of our region, very close to 1,000 kilometers from Slovenia border. So it's really a crisis that we are interested in. And then we have several conflicts now in Africa, which are very dangerous as well. We saw last year that United Council is the only council that is effective council. Only if the council is united, then we can have an effect on the ground.
How important is multilateralism here at the UN and working with larger countries like China at the Security Council?
Well, multilateralism for the small countries like Slovenia is an element of survival. The second Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld, used to say, or once he said, the UN was not built for P5. It was built for the rest. The P5 don't need UN because they have power. They are powerful. But everybody else does need. And small countries need UN. Small countries need multilateral. Small countries need rules that govern relations among countries. Otherwise, if we don't have rules, then might will rule. And of course, the multilateral is now under pressure, under threat. And so for us, this is important, something that we need to nurture. It's 80 years of UN this year. I think we'll need to focus how we strengthen the multilateral system.
2030 is just 5 years away, the end of the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. I want to get your take on where you see your country in reaching those goals.
Well, 2030 doesn't look very well in general as how the world is going to implement SDGs. I saw recently that most of the goals will not be met by the countries. As for Slovenia, I can say that we are lucky that we are very much on board. 80%, I think, everything achieved. But of course, it's all about the UN as such, where we are disappointed, and probably, and of course, the majority of the UN is disappointed. The global South is disappointed that these goals are not being supported enough. And I think this is the discussion that is going to come more and more into the UN.
Turning the page a little bit, your foreign minister paid a visit to China last year. How would you describe relations between Slovenia and China?
I think we have very good relations of 30 years. Since our independence in 1991, we've been developing, or 92 when China recognized us, we've been developing very, very friendly, very fruitful relations. We adhere to the One China policy. We have had a lot of visits last year, not only foreign minister, but also several other ministers visited China. So we really try to look for new ways of cooperation, especially economic ones. We have huge exchange. So we export a little bit, but import a lot. We also have a huge investment from China in Slovenia, which is working very well. But we're trying to balance a bit the relations, economic relations, and that's why we also have economic minister with the economic delegation visiting China. I think that we are looking forward to all the opportunities.
Ambassador, if you can tell us a little bit about your experience and your time in China and what you did there.
I have very good memories of China because this was my first foreign posting. I was a young diplomat, and Slovenia declared independence in 1991. And in 1992, we were recognized by China. In 1993, February, we opened the embassy, and I was the person who was sent by the minister to open the embassy in China. And then I was deputy ambassador during the time. So, this was the first steps in our relationship between China and Slovenia. And of course, was very interesting. We had the first visit of the minister, we had the visit of president, a visit of the prime minister, all in that, 2-3 years. So it was a big boom at the beginning. Was very excited. Also, the time in China was very exciting because there was a time of the opening up and huge transformation. So yeah, very interesting period. But I did visit China 3 years ago when I was state secretary in the foreign ministry. I went for official consultations with Chinese counterparts. And of course, this is a different China, it's a new China. I went to visit some of the places where we used to live, but it's unrecognizable. So it's tremendous progress and transformation that China went in the past 20-30 years.
Well, you were really there at the moment that the relationship between your two countries started. So you watched that grow. Can you share with us what your thoughts are on being there and then seeing where the relationship is today?
China's interest in the world, positioning in the world has changed dramatically since then. We have changed as well. At the time, we just declared independence. So all we wanted to discuss at the moment was, bilateral relations and economic relations. And at that time, we were still entering EU, entering NATO. We are not members yet. So now we also changed. We are a member of the EU. And with China, we don't discuss just bilateral relations, which are, of course, important. But we can discuss global issues. And that's, for me, is a huge change for us as well, to discuss with global power like China, the issue of the Middle East, the issue of Africa. The issue of relations between China and European Union.
Ambassador Samuel Spogar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Coming up.
I think having a real career that is sustainable with longevity is something that the youngsters can really look forward to.
UN Insider.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The UN is working to close the gender gap in science and technology. Only 22% of professionals in fields like artificial intelligence are women. Women account for only 28% of engineering graduates and 40% of computer science graduates. This week marks the 10th anniversary of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. Gender equality has always been a core issue for the UN. Empowering women and girls is seen as crucial to reaching the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Part of that includes expanding the role on women and girls in science and technology communities, and that extends beyond classrooms and laboratories into the high-tech, high-stakes world of esports.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the Valorant Champions Grand Finals!
It's actually pretty crazy. It started last year at Champions in the Grand Finals. Right before we walked out into the Grand Finals, my star player, Demon 1, it was me and him, and he turned around and looked at me and he said, "Do you think they're gonna be the loudest for me when I walk out?" And I said, "Of course they are, Max. Of course they're gonna be the loudest for you." And he walked out, the crowd went wild, and I'm just sitting there like in awe, just in shock, because, you know, I feel the stadium rumbling. And then they called my name and I go out and it was noticeably louder than anyone else's cheers. And so as I'm walking out, it was like a deer in the headlights moment for me. And that's when I realized it then, and I was just soaking it all in. I was just looking around at all the cell phones, and that's when I realized this is pretty big. It's a pretty big deal.
Potter walked out to this crowd, the cheers, the love that they received. I mean, for Potter especially, both of them used to play on the teams they currently coach, but a lot of people doubted her, Mimi. A lot of people criticized her, but she's answered back and she's proved why she's one of the best. We've had so far. The Yoru is out.
So Valorant is played in a 5 versus 5 setting. Your objective is to be able to plant the spike, and you're either on attack or defense. And if you're on the defense, your objective is to defuse the spike. On the attack side, you have to plant the spike. And if you kill all five of them, it doesn't matter. But in order to win, you do have to complete either of these objectives.
It's all over! EG are your Valorant World Champions!
The proudest moment in my career so far, because the obvious one is, of course, Champions 2023. You know, lifting that trophy with the team was a dream that I didn't even think I should dream. You know, it seemed that far away. That was a life-changing moment. But I'll say the one that I think about the most, or was the most life-changing, looking back now even, is My first win in ESWC 2006. That win really boosted my confidence. It boosted a lot of different things about me. I started becoming really proud of gaming. I was telling everyone about it. Prior to that, it was very much kind of a double life that I was living. So yeah, I think the first one was probably the most important one to me. I think the role of coaching is definitely evolving in the esports industry. I think having a real career that is sustainable with longevity is something that the youngsters can really look forward to. So hopefully that is the case. And yeah, coaching could be a sustainable career for the next generation, hopefully. My ambitions for the future are somewhat confusing at times, and I think they change. You know, before it was just trying to win something, and now that I've won something, it's winning more, right? But now I want to be a little bit more greedy. I want to, you know, everyone calls me the GOAT. I want to be able to say I am the GOAT proudly and just say it out loud, and no one can debate it. So yeah, I guess that's my next goal, is to make sure everyone knows that I am the greatest.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is a special edition of UN Insider.
UN Insider serves as an important window for the global audience to better understand multilateral diplomacy.
It's very important for the media to cover the United Nations, to seek to understand and tell the story in ways that the average person in the street can understand.
I think it's very important that the media should contribute to conveying important messages about the reality of today's challenges.
UN Insider has come to the UN, and we at the UN are so grateful to have it here. It is the only dedicated TV program to what is happening in the UN, and it is reaching so many people with, as it says in its title, inside the UN stories.
Media plays an important role in providing objective information across the world.
We think that media has a strong power of uplifting, you know, what we are trying to convey as messages as developing countries.
We need the mobilization of all peoples, of whole government and whole of society, and media can help us to be informed so that we also can make our part.
I think the media is fundamental to enable citizens across the world, first of all, to understand what is the rationale of having the United Nations. It's not that there is one place on planet Earth that will tell the rest of the world what to do. It is a much more complex story.